Hello everyone, it's Lady Spliff here. Welcome to my channel. It's bath time in the house. So there's going to be some extra sounds going on. We'll just call it the ambiance of today's today's lesson. So if you have followed my previous videos on the Religion of Alchemy that we're doing, we are starting off with the Hermetic Principles, and we've covered the first part of the first Hermetic Principle, which is Mentalism. And now we are in part 2, Mentalism part 2, where we are going to sort of touch on Buddhism and quantum physics. So, just starting off really quick, I am not an expert on anything. I do all of my research just in my own time and based in my own passions. Something that I highly recommend, and a lot of people that are in the field have confirmed that this is a really, really great book. The Intention Experiment, and Lynn McTaggart is an author that was sort of cataloging and speaking with the scientists who were all doing the forefront experimental research in the field of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and consciousness. So in her book, in the Intention Experiment, and as you can see, mine has been definitely read thoroughly. There's like notes, and I mean, it's a lot to absorb. So I highly recommend actually purchasing the book. But what she does in each chapter is kind of explains all of the experiments that were done and gives you like the names of the, machinery and the equipment that they were using, as well as the data that the scientists had found, so you'll understand like what the brainwaves were doing and what like particles were happening and things like that. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead and start off with Buddhism. Mentalism is extremely important for anyone trying to understand Hermeticism, alchemy, and ancient religions, especially that have a strong emphasis on the mind. Because especially if you come from more of a Western background in your understanding of religions, the mind element is actually not something that we have traditionally celebrated or focused on at all. And so even the little bit that we do, trying to understand an Eastern religion or philosophy's true depth of understanding of their practices that address the mind, it takes a lifetime of understanding. There's so much wisdom and knowledge there to uncover. However, when you are studying Buddhism, there are multiple different practices, sects, or versions of Buddhism that focus on different things. Hinduism sort of accumulated all of these various types of peoples and people groups that had varying cultures and traditional stories of deities and divinity and creation and their version of God and what the rules were. And sort of it all accumulated into Hinduism, where even though there are thousands of different gods, each with their own name and unique personality and attributes, it's pretty much understood under the umbrella of Hinduism that that is an aspect of the one true God. Buddhism comes from Hinduism and respects all beings and all things. Over 3,000 years ago was writing about this phenomenon happening in Buddhism that is describing consciousness. And this is why Buddhism and quantum physics and alchemy all correlate, because there's a heavy emphasis on this mind aspect, this mind element. Mahayana Buddhism is one of those that is very mind-only centered. Shakyamuni, which is a teacher that lived over 3,000 years ago, wrote down in the Avatmaska Sutra that all sentient beings are originally Buddhas. So there are like 6 sutras, which are mind only in the mind only school, and 11 treatises. And there are 3 main types of phenomenon that encompass all of reality. Just like in the Hermetic viewpoint, you have the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. In the Buddhist realm, you have the mental, the material, and the natural. And so there's what's known as like the Dharma realm. And in the Dharma realms, there's 10 realms within the Dharma realm. And all phenomenon, all of those experiences, the mental, the material, the natural, all manifest from true nature, which is what, if you become enlightened to your true nature, is that all of us are Buddhas. So our true self, our true form, our true nature, or our natural state of being is in original Buddha vibes, Buddha frequencies, Buddha enlightenment, Buddha alignment. So it's very similar to like the prima materia in alchemy and in Hermeticism. Now, when Buddhism starts to talk about consciousness, they also have different categories and ways of describing consciousness than just modern science. As you know, in our last video, we had the 3 categories. And in Buddhism, there are 8 consciousness levels. In the book, right here, we have, like I said, all of the various experiments that were done on the quantum level and in consciousness. And what it says is that consciousness is a type of matter. Matter being what everything in the universe is made up of. So consciousness is also a type of matter that is not limited to the physical body. Consciousness is clearly ordered energy, which is able to change. Page 17 says, we already have some preliminary proof. The physical world. Matter itself appears to be malleable, susceptible to influence from the outside. So, when speaking of consciousness from a scientific point of view, it's definitely something that exists that has a physical measurement, a physical frequency, and it can also be susceptible to influence from the outside. Now, what was happening in the beginning pages of the first chapter in this book, talking about the observer effect, how when you have particles at the subatomic level, they have to be frozen extremely cold temperatures so that you can manipulate them, because everything happens really fast on the quantum field. So to manipulate it and to slow it down and to freeze it, you can really decide what parameters you want to tamper with and mess with and what hypothesis you're trying to test. So it happened where there was a scientist, a young woman scientist, and she was in this lab where it was frozen, and she had this particular hypothesis, and she went to go and do the required, messing with and introducing heat and trying to see what would come from messing with these particles in this state with her hypothesis, and her hypothesis came true. And then another scientist with a different hypothesis, same parameters, same exact way of the formula that needed to be done that the previous scientist had done, same exact, like I said, parameters and environment for those particles. His hypothesis came true. And over time they realized that the observer involved in the experiments would influence the outcome, the results of every single test that was done. So this kind of gives us a bit of preliminary proof, and then it also gets into the collective consciousness realm of healing, physical healing, and intention setting, and all of that. So we're going to get into that. The entire goal of Buddhism is to achieve enlightenment, which is to see one's true nature and how one's true nature is being enlightened. The true nature is source. The 8 levels of consciousness that we were talking about in Buddhism The sixth sense, or the mind consciousness, or the sixth consciousness in the consciousness out of 8 of them, is the strongest. And they're saying that Buddha has taught us and explained that the sixth sense mind consciousness is our thoughts, and that thoughts in an instant moment reach to the edges of space and to the depths within us at the same time. And this interaction, this ability for thoughts to be limitless and just expansive, is the alaya. Now, the alaya is another word for source. Alaya consciousness is the origin of the 10 Dharma realms. Hang in there with me. Here we go. The Buddha, the Dharma realm, the Bodhisattva Dharma realm, the Shravaka's Dharma realm, Pratyeka Buddha Dharma realm. These are known as the 4 sages, the 4 sage realms, the 4 levels of consciousness that are considered sage levels of consciousness. Then we have the Shakyamuni Dharma realm, Buddha's Pure Land Dharma realm, and then from there the 6 realms. The Heaven Dharma realm, the Asura Dharma realm, the Human Dharma realm, the Animal Dharma realm, the Hungry Ghost Dharma realm, and the Hell Dharma realm, all manifested from alaya. Now remember, alaya is source, and what is alaya connected to? Our sixth sense mind consciousness, our thoughts. So we are literally seeing how Buddhism describes consciousness and describes frequencies and levels of consciousness that one can reach within their life. Like working out your own karma by helping other life forms on the planet. Having this understanding of the expansiveness of our own consciousness and our own frequency. To the Buddhism sect of Mahayana Buddhism is their focus. It is something that they really heavily study and practice and implement into their life. Avatamsaka Sutra and the 6 sutras in the mind-only school, they're often talking about the manifestations of the mind and the transformation of consciousness simultaneously. Remember, alaya consciousness is from which all experiences, all realms, all consciousness levels, all levels of life forms and everything stems from, is created from. But without alaya and connection to that consciousness, you are just with your thoughts creating manifestation without the transformative effects of being connected to the alaya source consciousness energy. All phenomenon, the sutras state, are illusionary. Do not mistake it for reality. The sutras teach us that when you are experiencing the phenomenon, don't forget that it's not actually what's real. And what's real is your connection to the alaya consciousness and the fact that your true nature is Buddha. Buddhism is taught to have a focus on your mind and your thoughts, and the way that they describe it might resonate a little bit more with you and the way that you understand these pretty complex topics, but if you're not somebody that resonates with the way that Buddhism speaks about these things in a poetic and sort of artistic and creative way, then perhaps like something like quantum physics is going to be your ticket to understanding these deeper concepts. For me, it was both, and something that really brought these two ways of thinking together for me in my mind were these experiments done with meditation specifically. So Buddhist monks are sort of notorious for being able to achieve this extremely heightened state of being through meditation, and meditation is something that is thrown around a lot even now in non-religious therapeutical circles and stuff too. So The meditation experts, these Buddhist monks in Tibet, were being studied by this scientist called Herbert Benson. And as you can imagine, it's freezing in Tibet in the mountains, and they were wearing almost no clothing and just meditating with their thoughts and breathing. And they were generating so much heat, and they were hooked up to equipment that was testing neurological differences as well as just regular data on their health and well-being, heart rate and pulse and things like that. Freezing cold water in buckets had blankets inside of them that were then taken out of the water and thrown on top of the monks who were meditating to raise their vibration, to raise their body temperature so that they wouldn't be cold. Kind of a mind over matter meditation, all being measured scientifically through Benson's team. And the blankets that were soaked in freezing cold water thrown on top of these monks were dried through the heat emanating off of the monks. And the heart rate and brainwave activity that was happening during their meditative state was something very unique in science for the time, the things that they were achieving by just thoughts. Lynn McTaggart, who wrote the book, and psychologist Stanley Kipner, as well as Alan Cooperstein, studied a whole bunch of master healers from different practices. So they had shamans, Native American healers, Qigong masters, master Buddhists, Protestants, you name it. They had a lot of different people who were known for their physical healing. And in every instance when they were studying and talking about how these healers would achieve their healing states, because they could actually measure with particular equipment the light photon streams coming out of their hands and their chakras and their fingers, these healers would get into a state where they could transfer energy, healing energy and intention remotely from different locations. And when studying this under a special camera, they were able to see that there's these like streams of like light emanating from the healer's hands or from their auras when they are in this particular state of altered consciousness. And every single one of the healers would speak about this moment, this altered state consciousness, as like a peak attention or a hyper-focused state for them internally. For instance, Native American traditions might use hallucinogenic drugs to get to this achieved state, but universally speaking in the Native American healer practices, they get to a higher or altered level of consciousness for remote healing or healing in general through repetitive rhythms by means of drums, rattles, chanting, singing, some cases handling live coals, and also it's from the Native American traditions that we have seen the benefits of extreme heat. Scientific studies have shown conclusive evidence that drumming in and of itself can help your brain get into a trance-like state. And that if you were to just sit in a room with not even the intention of getting into a trance-like state, but just listening to this repetitive drumming, that your brainwaves start to sort of get themselves into a natural rhythm and align with the drums. So that's interesting as well. There are different types of meditation. There are different types of achieving this altered state of consciousness. And it's not every single method is going to work for every single person. There's this guy named Bruce Francis who was a Qigong master and a martial arts champion. And he has been known to even send his opponents flying across the room just by using his mindful intention and his manipulation of ki. Bruce Francis is something that you might want to look into if you are really excited about the potential of like telekinesis and moving things with your mind, including like using the Force in Star Wars or being like an airbender or whatever. And his whole thing with Qigong is also through focused and intense breathing exercises. So healers can use all kinds of different methods to get to this state. They might use prayer or intense visualization, symbolic or mythic ideas that help with this visualization, verbal affirmation. You can sort of get the picture. So scientifically, what is happening in the brain? What is happening to these people? What can we see scientifically that is occurring with them that is allowing them to achieve these interesting results, which is, as the Buddhists would say, a manifestation and also a transformation of the consciousness, so that the physical representation of somebody's body who is receiving healing, for instance, decides to actually be affected and influenced by the external intention being placed upon them for healing. And that's why healers also universally speak about a compassionate love frequency or intention with everything that they do, because they know that the power of their mind can always do something the opposite of good, evil, or ill intent. So they always intentionally have a compassionate intention. What's happening inside of the brain is either a predominance in alpha rhythms, which is like a slow, high amplitude brainwave frequency of 8 to 13 hertz, or cycles per second. And this is achieved in your brain when you are having like a light dreaming session. So that's the alpha rhythms. Or the theta waves, which is 4 to 7 hertz cycles per second, which is slower and normally only present during like a heavy sleeping experience. And just comparatively, when your brain is awake, you have a normal hertz cycle of 13 to 40 hertz cycles per second. So what was interesting is that these healers were able to achieve a level of altered consciousness through whatever formula worked best for them and their personality. There's even a whole section for scientists that suggest certain personalities and certain ways that people's genetics play a factor in whether or not you might be psychic or more susceptible to psychic abilities. Another video, another time. But I did want to just end with the fact that healers and this altered state and connecting to the collective consciousness union on a frequency and energetic level sort of is described through these experiments that were done. And Gary Schwartz is somebody who worked on the human antenna, which is another experiment that you might want to look into if you're interested. But the human antenna experiment concluded that healing intention is really just well-ordered light emanating from the hands of healers in a coherent photon stream. And that the way that they can capture whatever and however they get into this altered state of being within with their brainwaves, their heart rate, all of that, and whatever they're visualizing for themselves about the collective conscious union aspect of it or the compassionate intention, that the actual light was emanating, that there was something transmitting from the healers that wasn't just cerebral, that it was actually physically manifested. And they had uncovered evidence that human beings in turn are both receivers and transmitters of quantum signals, and that directed intention appears to manifest itself as both electrical and magnetic. That the fact, what I'm saying, the implications of these experiments that were done, like I said, there were Protestant healers just using prayer in hospitals. There's examples of couples sort of learning how to direct intention to one another and being able to heal one another remotely as well, whether it be from a small scratch on the arm or somebody's back hurting or something like that. They had experiments talking about diseases being healed, cancer being healed, as well as being able to identify different data and measurements that occur from when somebody who has never meditated in their life is taught by an expert, like the monks who were experts at these particular types of meditations, and how just 20 minutes a day for a week proved that it was extremely beneficial to rewire people's brains that had anxiety and depression and things like this. So it's a really good book. The Intention Experiment is definitely something I highly recommend if any of these topics were interesting to you. I wanted to do like a more in-depth video with this book and with Buddhism, but really there's just way too much to talk about and we'd be here forever. Maybe that'll be another series down the road after I get through these Hermetic Principles. But in talking about how this has to do with mentalism and our intention and our mental sphere, our mental realm in particular. Before we move on in the Hermetic Principles, if you are having any sort of inclination that you want to dive deeper into quantum physics or Buddhism or mentalism as explained in the Hermetic and alchemical practices and traditions, then just take a breather from our series and just really try to integrate some of these things, this information. The last video had KRS-One mentioned, and my correlation of Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, and the Intention Experiment is actually, I'm going to link the man below. He is a Buddhist philosopher, Buddhist monk, Buddhist teacher who has spent his entire lifetime really trying to study and perfect Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism. And he recommended this book, and so I think that if you're interested in watching, he doesn't speak English, so it's definitely reading a lot of subtitles, but for me it was worth it. So if that's not for you, go ahead and get the Intention Experiment and join me next time on the second Hermetic Principle. Everybody have a blessed, amazing solstice, Christmas, holiday, Hanukkah, New Year, all of that. I most likely won't see you until 2021, so see you there.